Hellarena. Novel by Ayed Hindi. Part 3. Chapter 11. Valley of the Confined Souls. Death and demise were an inevitable course and predetermined fate for every living creature inside that hallowed planet. According to their own inherited beliefs, the eternally confined souls can be liberated from the body and refined to live in universal harmony, but they won't be purified until the body is wholly destroyed. According to their own rites, the people held a deep respect for the notion of death. Lord Norgel, who commands all aspects of the released souls after death, and their costumes and rituals were condoned according to his sacred instructions, and the main tradition was to drop the dead body after being cleaned, wrapped, and prayed upon into the great lava river Kash in order to release its soul from the infinite body to travel mercifully into the Valley of Souls. There, it will be locked with the other souls under the command of Lord Norgel in waiting time for the final judgment inside that holy valley, yet no one has ever crossed the valley alive. It is a unique realm inside the planet, and the ground there is holy and impregnable to any of the living flesh. It was the principle that held truth among all the inhabitants of the planet. Though, despite being a brave and experienced soldiers who had faced death in many terms of their army battles and military tasks, still, Ravdan and his company had their very moments of intense fear and much hesitation among themselves, especially when they first reached the hanging bridge towards the Holy Valley. Their own bodies were overwhelmed by frisson and shaking, chilled feelings mixed with anxiety and anticipation of the upcoming crossing. Although they were aware that was the only way ahead and there was no coming back. No one had crossed the bridge ever before. These words were still occupying their minds when they stood on that huge stone bridge that straddled between the cliff and the valley. Ravdan ordered them, with a heavy voice, to march on as he started to progress on that bridge. The view from there was incredible and terrifying at the same time. They could be imagined from far, the besieged and doomed city, covered with smoke plumes emerging from the destroyed buildings and many other burned structures. Underneath the bridge, the legendary Kash River journey comes to a spectacular end where the flooded, raging lava drops steeply from the rocky cliffs, creating immense lava falls crushing heavily on, at the bottom, to join a sea of red lava, bubbling violently with gases and seething lava with enormous force in a breathtaking scenery that defies all serenity of the nearby Valley of the Souls, which presumably lays at the edge of the other end of the bridge, that itself seemed without any visible or apparent end as it was descending to nowhere amid blurred visions and thick swellings of heavy, thick smoke from the bridge edges. As they were carrying on walking, Jerome asked Ravdan, "Sir, do you have any idea how this amazing stone bridge was built? It looks marvelous, and it seems to be without any visible end." The legend has told of this bridge being built by the holy angels. As no one would ever be able to build it, Blue Plusiv ordered his servants to gather the falling stones from the great Hasvard mountain and hold them together to create this bridge, for the purpose that Master Abadi, the soul collector, would march on and enter the planet to reap and bring back the freed souls. "Sir, are you saying we are walking on angels?" There is no support for the bridge at all, and these heavy stones can't stay afloat without anything to hold them. If you were looking underneath, you would see nothing that the stones can cling to. So be careful and never say anything untoward for the reason that we are being closely watched. After this chilling reminder, they kept on walking in silence over that stony bridge. The fog started to thicken, and their vision had gone totally. The way was obscured because of the rising dense green smoke that clotted even more during their marching and covered everything around them, and they could not see anything anymore. Ravdan took a long rope from his supply and ordered, by shouting at everyone, to hold it firm and never leave it. He was the first to head them on while he twiddled the rope around his wrist. They kept walking, following him in that dense green smoke, slowly and cautiously guided by the rope. It became very cold as the temperature dropped sharply while they were further descending from the hanging bridge top, and their ears were deafened by the howling noises that were bursting intensely from the surrounding crushing fallen lava. Suddenly, the white fog started to lessen a bit. They started to see moving faint shadows around them, taunting and harassing them, and immediately, Ravdan ordered his soldiers not to listen to any of the whispers coming from everywhere around them. He told them to just hold the rope and keep on walking. Pray for your own life's sake and for your final fate. That was his order until he himself froze and stalled at once, when suddenly a massive, mysterious spectacle thing stood in front of him. His heart was nowhere to find, and his chest was filled with awe and fear as he was totally overwhelmed and wholly terrorized by the sight of that celestial figure with a sharp-bladed weapon in his hand. It was for the longest moment in time, until that thing spoke to Ravdan directly with a gruff and rattling voice. "What is your purpose here, finite?" Ravdan bowed in haste and answered to that thing in a stuttered and shaky voice that could hardly be heard by anyone. "Your Great Highness, we want to pass safely to the besieged city, my lord. With your permission, we need to cross through the Holy Valley, through your holy kingdom. You are disturbing the peace in here. You made the unexpected precedent and caused a sinful uproar and huge mayhem among the confined souls by showing up here into this holy valley. It is an aberrant for a finite like you to dare and to approach the holy valley. Your time has not yet come to join the pond and the damned souls. You are not dead yet, or you would prefer to die right now, you finite?" Ravdan, filled with shiver and submerged with fear, responded with a trembling, stammered voice to that thing as he was attempting to exert a begging request to lean and abase the outrage and profound displeasure manifested by that holy figure. After all, he has somehow to reason with that menacing, ghostly warrior. "We had no other choice but to cross through here, my lord. We asked our holy red minus permission before we approached toward here, your holiness." Then, while he was still on his knees, Ravdan raised his shaking hand and showed the sparkling amulet that the king had given him. "This is our vow and a truthful sign of our sincere pledge to respect the death and the scarcity of the Holy Valley and every pawned soul there, my lord. We are here not to disturb your sacred kingdom or your subjects, but we humbly need just to pass without dishonoring the rested souls. With your permission and blessings, I'm following my king's orders, King Avauda, your servant, my holy lord." No one ever dared to disturb the secrecy of the Holy Valley, till this time by inferiors like you. Even if I let you pass as you requested, your journey will be marred through torment and pain, the kind of pain that would last until your soul, eventually, will submit to my rule. You won't be able to rest again. Your conscience will be in a daze and confusion. You will see rattling shadows everywhere, and through all the time hunting you and whispering in your ears, "Fool, this is your punishment for following orders and daring to desecrate and defile the holy valley for this time. It will last until you surrender your soul to me. I shall not perish you at this moment, though. You are a soldier, but I can wait for your soul deliverance upon entering my kingdom. In time, you need to scarify with blood and with soul, and for your king, this torment will not be enough. Even if he walks, he will be in stupor, dreaming in constant nightmares and hallucinations. His heart will be depleted and filled with trepidation and horror. His mind will always be suspicious and dreadful. He will never feel safe and secure again in his remaining life until his soul bows to me, and I will lock it to Prince Oroba possession. Your king will never have mercy from the holy red Minas. Go now, you infinite, and follow Lord Abadi the great angel to cross the holy valley." The holy figure vanished from everyone's sight, and the pain eased away as Ravdan managed to raise his head and bring himself about. He stood up the greatest trail, then he saw a great army of bright angels standing afloat in great rows over deep dark crevasses, or he might just think so in his stupor, and in between them was only a narrow long road, occupied totally by a glowing golden mystical chariot. Ravdan and his company gathered behind the chariot without being able to see who led that marvel feature. They started walking behind it as the chariot pulled away slowly, leading them onto that apparent endless somber road, and as they were gradually passing that ghastly road through, all the glowing angels were bowing to the chariot with awe and deep fear as the rays of light emanated from them, gleaming the way and guided them through. It was a holy scene that must have thrived prominently as flashed anguish memories prevailing in the minds of the followers of that chariot in a short distance, and an awe filled with anticipation of what is yet to descend upon them. They kept on walking behind that golden chariot, and it seemed for them that the ordeal and the distance they crossed felt as if it were going on forever, their bodies weary, tired, and exhausted, while the shadows were still surrounding them, taunting them, blinking in flashlights, and hunting them along that forlorn way. Yet, blissfully not for a long time, for their ultimate relief, an even deeper fog descended upon them suddenly, and for their great sigh of pleasure, the chariot stopped abruptly and then turned away at a brisk and vanished into the darkness, leaving them looking around there in great maze and marvel, wondering what happened, where they were, and where the chariot had gone and vanished. At that moment of confusion, Ravdan, their leader, spoke loudly to awaken them from their own anguish, flustering, and confounding horrible visions and told them firmly, "It's all over, soldiers. Now open your mind. Your heed is what I need, and be ready. We have another obstacle to breach." They looked at him, amazed, wondering what he had yet to endure. "Can you see that gray, steep hill in front of us? We have to go there and climb up there. We must encroach it, and then we shall be into the besieged city. That is our target." At first glance, they didn't notice that creepy, malformed hill until Ravdan pointed at it and mentioned it for them. Nonetheless, their vision was blurred, but their leader orders made them awoke and started walking towards the hill until they reached the first footsteps of that deserted hill and began broaching up towards the hilltop, slowly and cautiously along the way. When they finally got up there and successfully surmounted the steep hill, they perched upon the wide peak for their timely relief, merged gently with the overgrowth of gray and dark bushes that were covering the place. However, to their bewilderment, the image of the city was in their sight, and in front of their own opened eyes. As the hill was clearly overlooking the whole city fringes, they started peeking around them meticulously in an attempt to search for any combat troops or army entrenched there in any ditch waiting for any intruders. But to their total amazement, except Ravdan maybe, there were no soldiers to guard, or even at least some sort of militia at all, or any other type of defenses around them, to observe and protect the place from possible invaders. It was an open wide frontier for anyone freely to roam in, as they thought, by their own reason, that the enemies, the Malani nation, mischievously presumed to their naivety that no one would dare enter the city from here. Hence their unscrupulous planning is aberrant, or could be the lack of enough fighting soldiers to station around here and hunt the ghosts. The assumption that there would be no conqueror troops or any other intruder soldiers should have ever contemplated crossing the Holy Valley quite safely and piercing the devastated city from that open south front was spectacularly flawed. For that reason, the Malani had left the place wholly unsecured and entirely unattended. For Ravdan and his company, it was a very convenient time for a rest and a breather respite on that hilltop. It was a crucial reprieve to prepare themselves for their assigned dangerous mission that would have to come later. Yet those murky thoughts craped and occupied Ravdan's mind as he made strenuous efforts to grasp how King Avauda knew all about this place and how he described and explained everything for him. And he was absolutely sure that they would never encounter any resistance or guards at this post. Was he ever in this place? Had he ever crossed the Holy Valley? How would he know about all those phenomenal encounters? These thoughts stagnated and kept nagging in Ravdan's mind. Yet for the others, while they were resting their tired bodies upon the welcoming ground, they started talking and discussing what was yet to come and possibly revisiting what they had just experienced and passed successfully through. "Sir, we are very lucky so far. We passed the impassable path as it seemed. We endured the perilous mist and the cloudy visions around us that are still to this very minute hanging over my head. Sir, is it finished or do we have to endure another approaching torment ahead of us?" Ravdan was listening to Jerome's plight and pleadings, but his response was rather an evasive reaction to his assistant's fearful and anguished remarks. We are soldiers, Jerome. We obey our leaders' orders, and don't ever forget that we are sacrificing ourselves for our great nation and for our beloved King Avauda, the Great of the Galatians. But I hope it is the final stage of our journey. Surely these comments were not meant to relieve any of his guards' fears and may disabuse them of any further anxieties ahead of their mission into that ruined city. It was the preparation, meant for the worst yet to come, and to consolidate their remaining strength as a unit to achieve their designed lethal final goals. Chapter 12. The Message. While at that critical time of preparations for the final attack, Ravdan and his company were stationed for a short rest at the hilltop after successfully crossing the dangerous Holy Valley before attempting to enter the besieged city. King Avauda called on Marketh to summon his high military council together with the designated wise men to hold an urgent war meeting to decide what would be the next step to finish off the bloody war with the Milanese that lasted for many years and cost many lives and vital resources. It was an important meeting for the Galatians nation and for the king himself, in which he had obscured everyone except Marketh and his daughter, Princess Cara, about the dangerous mission into the surrounded city, rather than his own insecurity and distrust of all of the people around him, and by now it seemed like the proper time to tell the rest of his closest ring of associates. King Avauda told Marketh to let the military meeting take place first, and then he would meet with the wise men after concluding with the army generals over the war plans. The king had ordered Marketh to let the wise men listen to the war council in the royal chamber, but from far away. The king claimed his place and chaired the first meeting, where he sat on his throne at the head of the great royal chamber in his grandiose palace, surrounded by his private guards, and alongside them, the military generals and the army officers, to discuss the urgent matter proclaimed by the king himself. Everyone in the chamber was in deep silence until the king himself broke the news and spoke to his oblivious audience about Ravdan's mission into the besieged city, in arrogance and much audacity. "Are my forces ready to attack the doomed city, General Zingi?" The king was inquiring about his highest-ranking general in his raucous voice, asserting his dominance. "As ever, Your Majesty, at any given time, we are waiting eagerly for your orders. All your army divisions are well prepared and ready to conquer the doomed city." While the king was listening to his general, he seemed nervous, worried, and not in his usual calm royal mood, as he was about to tell the gathered military council the details of his prearranged plans for the surrounding city. "I need to inform you that I have sent Ravdan, the head of the special guards, into the doomed city, and he is now in there upon my orders. He, along with his company, will reach the desperate plan gathering at the temple and kill Princess Lion and her other companions in there. He will then send a signal when he finishes his mission, and by then you should." The king was pointing to General Zingi. "Attack the city from all sides and don't leave anything standing in there. I want you to flatten and erase the whole place, and when I shall enter the place of victories, I don't want to see any of their remnants still holding in there. Our victory should resound and be complete." "Yes, Your Majesty," answered General Zingi. The audience seemed shocked upon hearing this news, as for them it was a complete surprise and unexpected announcement, but no one of them dared to show any discontent or the slightest rejection to the king. After all, they are the army generals, and what concerns them is the warfare itself. They dreaded failing more at the war, and their hearts were replete with much fear from the king's brutal retributions, as they knew any kind of sluggishness at any advance meant hard and extreme punishments from the king, who turned to the generals and asked them harshly, "Explain for me your preparations for the final attack, generals." The herd of generals brought a big model showing the surrounded city and the troops' positions on the ground. While the king was busy listening to them, he noted, "How will you be able to penetrate their defensive lines? They are entrenched in them for a long period of time, and they made all of the craters filled with lava, fenced the hills with high stone walls, cut the roads and gate passages with caltrop, and cut deep into grooves and moats. Do they control the buffer field between our army and their troops?" The king tested his generals on their attack plans. General Zingi explained his plans to the king to a good extent. "We have been inspecting and surveying the frontiers very carefully all in the past periods. It seems to our experts that their army doesn't possess enough fighters to hold the defensive lines for the longer term under our pressure. The remainder few, and they are using even dummies to look like they had enough soldiers to fight and fill the gaps in the empty trenches. The general continued, "Nevertheless, we have to be careful. It could still be another trick. We have prepared to use numerous large, spherical hay pellets mixed with special substances that will be pushed from the Adam Mountain foothills towards the city defenses at the northern front. It will gather momentum on its way downhill, and then it will catch fire when it touches the craters filled with lava in its way and will hit hard the defenses lines and jump onto the fortified soldiers to burn them at their locations. While our soldiers will be ready to cross the passages using the makeshift solid wooden beams to scale and breach the made-up grooves on the passages and make way for our chariots to enter the city without resistance, and for that purpose, we have enforced the caterpillars with enough ammunition to continue aiming at the enemy defenses. We have provided it with special ammunition for those caterpillars that can carry a burning mixture that will scorch the living creatures and everything it touches inside there. We have also prepared special units of our deadly train dogs that will accompany the advanced soldiers. They will be led to attack first, and the archers' divisions will aim at the enemy during that stage of advancement to provide cover for the progressed infantry troops headed by the Red Knights Royal Divisions. General Zingy wrapped up his summary of military planning. Without any doubt, your army has prepared everything, including the ammunition, and what we all need is your orders to enter the city, Your Majesty. The king looked very pleased at that graphic description by his army generals, who seemed even more eager to annihilate the whole population inside the doomed city as a matter of showing total obedience to His Majesty the King. What about the ground itself? Can it hold firmly against all those heavy attacks from our troops and not cave in and break down? The whole area can crumple and collapse under heavy and enormous pressure, as I heard from Mardak and many others. We could lose our brave troops alongside those coward infidels if the ground disintegrated. The king asked his generals with the utmost seriousness. It's a myth, Your Majesty. They made it, crafted it, and spread it to scare us and to halt and impede our advancing troops. I can assure you, Your Majesty, that we have seen nothing to prove this mystical idea, and I am sure we are much wiser than to believe in such nonsense and dubious peculiarities from the desperate, decaying enemy hiding in a dilapidated city. General Zingy has replied to the king's obvious worries about his final campaign. Then King Avauda, after being briefed about the military plans and all of his army preparations, dismissed them and ordered his army generals to go back to their military bases and to be ready for the signal to start attacking the surrounded city, but they cannot attack until he joins them at the front lines. Watching from far next to the royal chamber entrance, the 7 wise men, whom constitute the council, stood together, waiting to be present to the king to give advice, as their duty was to assist the king in the spiritual and mundane ruling matters of his own people. It was an old tradition, established a long time ago, dating back to the early days of the Galatians' kingdom inside the Hollow Planet. They were called upon by Marketh to come forward to the king, who was, at the time, the least curious about their opinions regarding his own plans, but it was meant to be done, and he, in a stony mood, asked them, "My old wise men, it is good to see you together again. Tell me, for the sake of all our great nation, what you think about my arrangements for my people's future. I would like to hear from you if you have something positive to tell me." After a few seconds of hesitation, Lyndon, the new head of the elders, who was recently appointed by the king to supersede his perished predecessor, Shamash, answered him in a humble voice, carrying fear and caution. "Your Majesty, we all lay under our Red Minus's mercy. We wish for our brave troops a rapid victory and a safe outcome for their sake." Then he fell into silence for a breath and continued with the same tone. "We believe, as a united council, that Blue Plusive would be unhappy and probably upset to observe a massacre happening during the people's most holy vigil, in the middle of their congregation and worship gathering. It is a duty we have all to observe and to respect. We should not defile Blue Plusive's holy temple, especially during the holy sermon services, despite our differences. We have been holding to this tradition, and that was our covenant since the beginning of our journey time. Here inside this isolated place, We are deeply wary that your majesty has decided otherwise for our troops, upon your orders, to enter the surrounding city at that specific time to spell the blood of the people, and moreover, you know, your majesty for sure, that Red Minus holds a special place and distinctive statue for Princess Lion. She is the— But the king furiously interrupted him in apparent anger. There is no special statue for the infidels and the weak traitors. How dare you accuse me of defiling Red Minus holiness? The king shouted in anger, and his voice reverberated throughout the royal chamber while the wise men bowed in fear. He was clearly defiant and unhappy to hear any kind of objection from his own subjects. The disobeyed will all be punished, severely and mercilessly. That is the ultimate tradition we have and will always keep. Then he calmed himself down and asked them, after a short silence, "What does the Holy Book have to say about people like Lion? We have a convent with the Red Minus, and it made a pledge to our people that we should end what we have started. This is a holy war from the beginning of time. We can only choose between survival and death. There is nothing in between. We cannot let the infidels roam freely among our own people. We have been given all of this land solely for our nation. Everything became ours only. How come you want me to save her and keep her alive? Is she holding a covenant with Blue Plusive? If she is so dear, why didn't Blue Plusive save her family's lives when the swords were flying around their necks? Our brave troops cleaned their land from the outcast and proudly paraded her father's head among our people with much joy and pride that filled our solid hearts. Tell me what the Holy Book says about this matter." The king stopped his howling. "Your Majesty, we have to ask the righteous one, Mardak, and he might answer your inquiry better than us, Your Majesty," answered Lyndon. "You may dismiss," Avauda said. The king shouted at them. The wise men left the chamber in haste, while the king was staring at the chamber ceilings in anger. He was agitated to hear such a ridiculous idea about what he was allowed to do. While the atmosphere at the royal chamber was full of poisonous thoughts, a soldier entered the chamber and whispered to Marketh, and then he walked toward the king and said to him, "Your Majesty, if I may?" The king replied by nodding his head gently. "Your Majesty, the mutineers took hold of your daughter, Kara, and they are demanding a ransom to release her from captivity," Marketh said. The king did not appear to be much affected by the late news and seemed calm and showed no emotions upon hearing such news, for his mind was much occupied with Mardak. How come he forgot about him all this time? It has been a long time since he spoke to Mardak, and he is surely now roaming somewhere in the wilds. I am certain that I would need him now, not maybe for advice, but to calm the people down if something went wrong. Then the king awoke from his thoughts and far visions, and he realized that he needed to act and deal with his own daughter's fate and said to Marketh, "I told her not to go with Ravdan, but she insisted. Anyway, Marketh, give them what they want and make sure this is their last gift from me. They will be our last mission after annihilating the Malinese." "Yes, Your Majesty," replied Marketh hastily, and he went out of the chamber to bring Kara back from the mutineers' captivity after paying them again for her release. But before he left, King Avauda asked Marketh, "Do you know where Mardak is? Or if he is still alive and well?" "No, sir, I don't know anything about him, but I will send some people to find out, and I will bring to you anything that comes to my knowledge about him." Chapter 13. Mardak. Upon orders from King Avauda, Marketh went to Lyndon, the head of the wise, and asked him about Mardak and his place so he could visit him. Lyndon answered him, "Mardak was embodied and his soul had not been created. That was what much was rumored about Mardak. Yet where he came from was obscure to everyone's knowledge. Even more odd was his whereabouts." Lyndon then continued telling Marketh what he knew about Mardak. They rumored that he is the true manifestation of the divinity judgments and the logic into that planet. He holds the secrets to eternal life, the key to cross the valley of the confined souls for the predetermined passage of the eternal life. But you can't call him a blue plusive or red minus, for the reason he is not meant to claim. He can show you the right path, but he was unable to absolve your heart from evil wickedness and malevolent thoughts. He lived forever, yet his presence was mere a whisper that whether into time and space, never pass and never miss, built unto the spirit of the holy goodness. He had never talked to any but the chosen ones, as he was unable to speak to the mass. Though the voice and the noise are mundane, and he was not of that kind, still, to the amazement of every living creature would encounter, he could tell you the truth beyond the concealed veil of mystery. Meekly and humbly, he would respond to your worries. He would point out the truth in your soul and the need to uncover it. Everyone was in search of him, and only the few could ever have an encounter with him. Not everyone was lucky indeed, but the lucky few described him as a body of gentle fire emanating to warm the soul, relieve the sorrow, and enlighten the heart. Fire that never burns but brings wisdom alight to the ignorant and the oblivious. He will answer your plights with words written on a mist, yet he holds the holy book of deliverance that keeps the secrets of liberation and eternal salvation. He will show you the passage and bequeath the wisdom upon you, only if you follow him with your soul. But behold, the passage is sacred. It holds the fire that eases the grief and also holds the fire that causes the pain, the extreme agony, and immortal death. Blue Plusive bestowed on Marduk the judgment and knowledge to write the book and help the needy and the betrayed. He lived forever, but came later to this world. In the beginning, the people of the planet lived in harmony and in tight community until after Red Minus intervention in the last great volcanic eruption that rattled the whole planet and caused a shortage of resources and supplies and created a huge demand. The nations started battling each other to control the remaining scarce energy sources, and all the previous convents had been broken and torn apart. They started a new system inside that planet where only the stronger could survive, and greed became the only acceptable universal virtue. The people needed guidance, and to help them steer away from extinction and total demise, Blue Plusive sent Marduk, his true servant and his own wordkeeper, to the people inside Abyssington in a final attempt to save some of them. Marduk never spoke to anyone but only the few, upon Blue Plusive's advice, for the reason people listen but they soon forget. They believe their own eyes more than their own ears. Marduk brought them the holy book that he inherited from Eliad to guide them through the hard times they endured in the confinement, in the hope that whomever would see in his own eyes and believe in his own heart would survive the inevitable destiny. Lyndon stopped for a moment, and then he continued telling the story that he heard from his killed boss, Shamash. Marduk started his reconciliation journey when King Avauda was yet a junior prince among the Galatians' kingdom, and as a young prince, he had to follow the old traditions of his tribe. Avauda used to go hunting for the beasts as he had been instructed, into the woodlands surrounded by the Azamic Mountains, and he used to spend many days in that rigged, desolate area. There were many types of vicious beasts living and roaming in that woodland, and he loved to spend much of his time there with his friends from the other royal families. They used to stay away for many weeks isolated from the world to adapt to the cruel and hard conditions to embolden their hearts and physical strength and free them from fear and anguish. As he grows up, he becomes more admirable of the strong men and the vicious, while he is less affectionate of women and the weak of the creatures. His heart becomes merciless like his closest friends, Zingi and Shamash. During one of Prince Avauda's excursions into the wilderness, he encountered Marduk, who appeared to them out of nowhere. They thought he might be one of the mutineers who wanted to harm them. They all pointed their crossbow toward him, but their hands were frozen. They couldn't move or do anything. Marduk approached them calmly and ordered them to drop their weapons. Zingi and Shamash kneeled before Marduk in horror, while Prince Avauda stayed standing and asked, "Do you know who I am?" shouted Avauda and continued yelling. "How dare you use your magic powers to stop me from defending ourselves?" Who are you? Are you one of the filthy mutineers? Mardak answered him, I was not allowed to speak to anyone except you. This is not a magic power. This is the power of blue plusive and red minus, bestowed upon me to enlighten the ignorant like you, Prince of Auda. I am Mardak. I am the holder of the true words, the holy book. I have been sent to tell you about things yet to happen. You have to obey my word to be the next powerful king. Your future has been determined. You must cleanse yourself and your people. That is the only way to have mercy from blue plusive and red minus. If you ever wish to depart this place and return with your people back to your origin, this is the convent that binds you with blue plusive and red minus until you and your people can ever achieve redemption from the confinement that was imposed upon your sin nation. Your people have paid the price, and it is time to gain back your freedom. Then Mardak pulled a roller from his garment, handed it over to Avauda, and told him, This is the convent, and it is valid as long as you adhere to it. Mardak disappeared suddenly, the same way he appeared from nowhere. While his friends were confused, Prince Avauda shouted to them, Did you hear what this strange man has just told me? No, sir, they both answered. We were in a trance. Our eyes were blurred, our tongues were numb, and our ears were coated. Tell us, our prince, what he told you. Prince Avauda laughed and said to them, I am the chosen one. I shall be the victorious next king. That was what he assured me in the name of blue plusive and red minus, the great king, upon this whole, entire confined place. No one would ever challenge me with the powers bestowed upon me. It is the sacred convent between me and the ultimate power. They were bewildered to hear what Prince Avauda had just told them about this stranger and the sacred convent. It was not his time nor his rank to be the next king of the Galatians nation, but Prince Avauda was in euphoria despite their doubting and disbelief, as he would forgive their inkling and doubtful mind whenever he achieved the true promise. These memories burst suddenly into King Avauda's mind when Marketh returned to him and told the king what Marketh had learned from Lyndon. He whispered to himself, I will be the great and the only king inside this confined world. It will be my world. For me only, I will be immortal here. But if we ever return to our origins, to our deserted land on Earthington, then what would I be there? What is our position among the other nations and among the other kings in that world? Would I be able to dominate Earthington just like I am here? Would the ultimate power bestow me his grace and give me the command on Earthington, and my soldiers would prevail all over there? Chapter 14. Inside the besieged city. After enjoying a sojourn and a short breath on the hilltop, while relieving themselves from the torment they passed through in the Valley of the Confined Souls, Ravdan and his company kicked off, pursuing their dangerous mission by descending from that hill edge into the empty, ruined city suburbia. They were able to change their military uniforms to match a civilian one in order to disguise themselves among the crowds and prepare their own weapons before entering those desolated districts. In spite of not encountering anyone on their way, they were scouring the whole place carefully as it was virtually deserted to their bare eyes. Yet they could still hear loud voices coming from far, deep into the city center. These noises must be the great people gathering at the temple. I hope we can make it on time, soldiers. Ravdan said to his company as they carried on walking through the empty streets, but not rushing through as they were still scaring the place they passed into. It was a sad scene, a reminder of the city's melancholic fate. The places were filled with debris of crushed walls and encircled by rubble, broken structures, many destroyed buildings, and also many, to their astonishing, abandoned and semi-charred corpses of men scattered all around them, with some of these bodies covering their faces with weird green foam. The Malani people must have forgotten how to perform the holy rites and do their duty to the poor perished soldiers. Jerome, the head assassin, was speaking to Ravdan and continued his sarcastic comments by implying poor judgment. Either there are no men left to fulfill the holy rites and old traditions properly, or they became rurally, unbothered and lazy, and eventually ready to be reaped by our mighty forces. Ravdan interrupted him and said firmly to everyone with him, "Or they may not be dead as yet." Everyone seemed suddenly shocked to hear what Ravdan had said, and they pulled their weapons in readiness for any confrontation. Away from the revenant, don't walk too close to them, as your body heat will probably awaken them from their suspended animation, torpor, and deep trance. Avoid all these cryonic corpses, and you will be much safer. Let's move now from here. Ravdan ordered his soldiers, and they followed suit and kept on marching through the empty city streets, passing through the falling rubble and widespread carnage. The air was filled with the nasty smell of recent deaths of the decomposed corpses and animals' cadavers spanned out in the destroyed quarters of the city. The assailant company became more alerted and even worried as the loud noises started to crack their ears, coming from the great people's gathering, gradually as they were getting much closer to the holy temple. "We are very close to the temple, sir. I can see the crowd from my position here," the soldier told Ravdan while he was busy preparing his weapons for the assumed attack. "We need to find a good vantage position to hit our targets accurately with our harpoons. All the buildings around us look deserted. Jerome, let's go there." Ravdan was pointing to a typical double-story building set alongside the main road they were about to cross that survived partially the destruction, and he thought it could be used to survey and find the precise killing spot from a post up there. They walked gradually and cautiously towards the abandoned building, then carefully checked the place and managed to open the front door slowly and entered inside into a lobby, brandishing their weapons. They cut through an adjacent gallery, which leads to a stairway heading upstairs, and as they started to climb the stairs carefully, suddenly emerged from nowhere. Many soldiers, descending from the upper floor and running past the marvelous gallery. They were pointing their weapons at Ravdan and his company members, and the soldiers started to shout loudly, "Drop your weapons now." The assailant group was totally caught by surprise, and they were absolutely surrounded and hugely outnumbered by the heavily armed city defenders. They were well-prepared fighters for the occasion, and the Ravdan team had no choice but to give up and succumb to their weapons and subsequently kneel upon the floor while the soldiers rounded them one by one, shackled them with iron chains, blindfolded and led them to an empty room in the building where they were embedded to the walls and encircled by the ready-armed soldiers. Then, the head officer singled out Ravdan and moved him outside that room for the purpose of interrogation, as the leader of the defender group had ordered. Ravdan was walking heavily and warily, burdened by the chains wrapped around his wrists and ankles. He was steered into another prepared room, where the soldiers halted him inside and started releasing his body from these metal chains, and his eyes from the fold, and then they escorted him outside that building to another one nearby. Upon his entry, there were Barkle and Princess Lion at his reception waiting for him, and Barkle immediately started speaking to him. "You are a brave man, Ravdan, and a good soldier. You have done the right thing. You risked your life by arriving here and passing through very dangerous places in order to save our people." Then Princess Lion spoke to Ravdan. "I can't forget your noble deeds since you saved my life from Marketh at the Guvia battle. You helped me escape the massacre that no other member of my family could avert and saved his life. I will be grateful for you the rest of my life, Ravdan." "I will do anything for you, Princess Lion. Mardak showed me the right path that I am following." He answered her sincerely as they stared at each other, and the memories flooded their own minds about the moments they met each other. But Barkle interrupted this moment of possible deep love. "We need to act fast, Ravdan. Your king's troops will attack soon, and we need to stop them. They will not move an inch until they receive my signal. That was the instruction I received from the king. and I'm not sure they are ready yet to attack the city. They want to attack throughout the chaos that would occur at the temple if the plot is implemented as it was planned by the king, Ivauda himself. We should continue our gathering at the temple, and we need to proceed to Blue Plusiv's worship rituals as had been decided, said Lion. They agreed to leave together and join the people's prayers in solidarity, and on the way there, Ravdan asked Barkle about the imprisoned men. They accompanied him through the journey. We will wait to see their reaction. I mean, the Galatians, and then maybe exchange them in return for some advantages. We will meet after the prayers to decide our future. Barkle answered briefly, and they carried on walking until they reached the holy temple and took their place among the worshippers' crowds at the front of that all-important gathering. The mass people of the Malinese tribes were converging and gathering in the evening on the day of the reckoning, whereupon their sacred rites to please the entwined eternal fire started in the dominant capacious temple in the center of their last remaining city, Zediapolis. They were all in awe and reverence, fronted by their elite leaders, pleading and begging their ultimate twins, Blue Plusive and Red Minus, to help them in their last remaining chance of life on that hallowed planet. The gathering sang in mass and all together. Our Creator and Slayer, you know your people are on trial. You know how faithful they are to your worship and to your service. You know how much we need you and your powers to help us overcome our constant ordeal and alleviate the calamity we lived throughout the last days. We pray and pray, our souls torn apart, our tears demanding your mercy, Almighty. Blue Plusive. Listen to our plight and comfort our fears. Relieve our worries. Help our children. Embolden our soldiers. And give them the courage and the necessary resolve to defend our last remaining city and our enduringly tortured souls. Bestow the strength and prudence upon our leaders to survive thereafter and avert our gloomy destiny with your blessings, your infinite mercy, and your deep wisdom. We can cross those dark times that fell and came upon us by our weakness and recklessness. Blue, Plusive Almighty, intercede to our deep remorse and accept our contrition. Listen to our prayers and our sincere supplications. You are merciful, generous, and love your own creations. Have mercy. Forgive our ignorance and our ingratitude. We know you are listening. Help us. The gathering was shouting and bewailing in one voice that reverberated around the temple and echoed the lament prayers as their eyes were staring throughout the open roof of that temple, reaching towards the eternal fire light that occupies the heavenly center of the planet. Then, the worshippers fell into a deep silence and contemplation, and only the sounds of sighs and groans could be heard. The leaders of the Malinese were at the front of the gathering, facing the sacrifice altar in the temple and praying in silence when suddenly Prince Kadorf turned to Princess Lion, who was standing next to him, and asked her, "Do you think they would ever help us?" Princess Lion felt the sarcastic tone in Kadorf's question, and without looking at him as she was busy gazing at the eternal fire, she nodded her head and replayed, "We have no choice other than praying and observing. Nonetheless, we must also be ready for any outcome." Prince Kadorf was unconcerned about what was happening, though. He asked her again, "You should feel safe now as your admirer from the Galatians crossed all the impassable obstacles to be with you. Isn't that wonderful?" Princess Lion answered him, "I am safe as long as all of you are around me." Prince Kadorf retorted in anger, "There can be only one of us. I should challenge him to a duel, one-on-one. He won't refuse, would he?" "Calm yourself, Kadorf. We need him alive as he is part of a future exchange with the Galatians. If you're so eager for a duel, then you can have it with King Avauda. That is your best match." The silence of the gathering didn't last for long as Princess Lion assumed the high altar and then started chanting a tearful lament poem loudly to please her almighty gods and invigorate her desperate people. "Many sleepless days since your grace. It had been way too long to follow. It filled every part of our broken hearts. With raucous pain and deep sorrow, reminisces of the sacrifices and the blood offerings in your honor. We are still faithful and sincere. Despite the big loss and the ever-humbled defeat, your love will never leave our hearts. I thought the wars had torn all of us apart. We lost our beloved fathers and brave brothers, and our dear children moved away from our happy land into this barren, felled, empty warren ground. Our mothers were tortured, and our sisters, we were viciously raped. The wealth you Almighty bestowed upon us, in the wind, which withered and disappeared, what we had dissipated and all but shattered and in crumbs were shredded. O Almighty, your mercy will prevail. Your leniency will fall like a torrent of hail. Glorious in your name, we shall on the enemy assail. Against the evil winds, we all shall to the victory sail. Our destiny lays in the darkest, gloomiest shadow. Your holy light we all shall follow. With your grace, we shall all pass the narrow, painful path. And we all shall survive the feral enemy and his evil, vile, never-ending wrath. After that long, sorrowful reading from her heart, she stopped and fell in silence. She was drained emotionally and tired physically, and she started to wipe the running tears from her two wide eyes and vivid red checks. She looked upon the mass eagerly, and after gathering her remaining courage, she shouted emphatically, "O Almighty, have mercy upon us." And all the mass followed her to shout and chant loudly in one spirit and in one loud voice. End of part 3.